So today I want to talk about something that shaped my childhood and a lot of other people's childhoods, and that's creepypastas. If you don't know what creepypastas are, they're stories that were written online by regular people, and what made them really special is just how believable some of them really were. When you watch a scary movie or a horror show, you know that it's fake. There's production, special effects, actors, directors, but when you're a kid on a forum reading one of these stories, it just felt real. You couldn't fact check things the way you could now, and that's what really made them hit so hard. So grab a snack, some hot cocoa, and let's get into it. Now before we begin, I just want to preface this by saying that these are not going to be in some kind of specific order. I'm picking a few creepypastas that, to me personally, sound the most believable, especially when I was a kid. There's so many creepypastas out there, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who have their own favorites, and that'll be really cool to hear, so put that down in the comments. So the first creepypasta I want to talk about, which is probably the most famous one, is the Russian sleep experiment. So the story is set in the 1940s, probably about the end of World War II, so early Cold War days. It takes place in a Soviet research facility. Scientists take 5 political prisoners and lock them in a sealed chamber, pumping in special gas meant to keep them awake for 30 days. At first, everything seems fine. For the first few days, they talk, they have enough food to last them over a month, and everything seems fine. But as days go by, the prisoners become paranoid, violent, and eventually mutilate themselves in horrifying ways. When researchers finally open the chamber, they discover the test subjects have turned into unrecognizable monsters. Some of them had missing organs, they had flesh that was hanging off of them. It got really gruesome, and what made this more believable is this was the end of World War II. We've all been in history class, we know about all the inhumane tests that, Nazi Germany was conducting. So this was very believable that perhaps somewhere in Soviet Russia they were doing such an experiment on political prisoners. It seems very believable, right? Like a sleep experiment to be conducted on people and just seeing what happens to somebody who's fully sleep deprived. A lot of these creepypastas have images that go with them, and usually when you're a kid, that's what really sticks with you. You're listening to these scary stories and the images, they're just something that haunts you afterwards. There's a really famous one that I'll put up on the screen from the Russian sleep experiment that I think most people who've ever heard of this story can identify immediately. Obviously, when you read the entire story, it becomes a little ridiculous and unbelievable. But when you're a little kid and you're listening to this story and there's creepy music and creepy images, you can't help but get freaked out. And this was one that was passed around all over the internet. This is probably one of the most famous creepypastas, so felt like it deserved to be in the list. The next one we got on the list is Squidward's suicide. Some people call it the Red Mist. Now this one was another really popular one, and it's part of the lost media genre. I know that's a really popular one, especially when people go back into old movies or old shows that just disappeared, missing episodes. It's a really popular genre on YouTube, and I remember this one was a big creepypasta that when I was a kid and I was watching SpongeBob really made me believe it. So the story goes that there was an intern in Nickelodeon, and they were preparing for season 4 of SpongeBob, I believe, and the Nickelodeon animators created a disturbing SpongeBob episode where Squidward commits suicide. The episode goes that Squidward was practicing his clarinet, SpongeBob was yelling outside, so Squidward told him to shut up. Then there was this transition where he's on stage and he's getting booed. And it gets really graphic because the way he was getting booed was reported not the regular funny SpongeBob booing, it was a little more sinister. The story reported that the characters had real eyes instead of those cartoony eyes, and they were bloodshot. Just that imagery alone is really creepy, especially when you understand that you're talking about an animated show, and putting little human elements into it just makes this uncanny valley kind of vibe. After Squidward was booed, the rest of the episode is him sitting at home and just crying. And he's just sobbing. He's very hysterical. When you're reading the creepypasta, they talk about how it cuts and there's really disturbing images, and then it cuts back and he's crying again. The episode essentially ends with Squidward taking his life. He couldn't handle being booed off of stage. It's just very graphic when you read it or you listen to it. There's an accompanying image for this creepypasta, and it's of Squidward with these bloodshot eyes, and there's blood coming out of his eyes, and it's really creepy. And I remember this so well when you're a kid. It sounds really funny because again, it's SpongeBob and it's a little kids TV show, but when you think about lost episodes or some disturbing things, we all know that animators and people who make movies and cartoons, they sometimes like to put a little something for the adults just to make it a little funny, like the little Easter eggs. So It was very believable that this was possible, that there was some kind of lost episode that's really disturbing, that maybe was just like an inside joke. So when you take all of that into account, this was one that I actually believed in until I was fairly old. And then I started realizing that a lot of these are just fake made up stories by people. Definitely check that out. This next creepypasta is really interesting because it's told from the perspective of a few people on a forum remembering a show they watched when they were kids called Cove. As the conversation went on, they started remembering more details about the show, characters, themes, even disturbing imagery. It seems really innocent at first, just people reconnecting, until one of them decided to go to a nursing home to ask his mom more about the show. When he came to her and asked her about Cove, she was really surprised that he remembered anything about it at all. When he asked why, she replied that he used to just turn on the TV, stare at static, and say that he's watching Cove. It freaked me out a little bit just because it felt like a fever dream. We've all had those shows that we used to watch when we were kids. Like, for me, it was Lazy Town. It's one of those, like, everybody watched it, but it still feels like a fever dream and not just like a regular show. So imagine that happening to you. Imagine one day you realize that some show you know was never really a thing, and you're just like in this weird reality. So this was one that I thought was really cool, and this is also very popular creepypasta. This next one I think most people know because it's tied with a character that a lot of people portray in Comic-Cons and other conventions. We're talking about Jeff the Killer. This creepypasta was also very popular like the rest of them, and actually transcended where people started making little shorts and even spin-off characters. This story is about Jeff, who's a teenager who moves to a new neighborhood. After being bullied, he gets into a fight where he brutally injures his attackers. At a party, the bullies come back for revenge. Jeff gets doused in bleach and lit on fire. He survives this attack, but his skin gets ghostly pale and his face gets scarred. He carves a smile into his cheeks, burns off his eyelids, and completely loses his mind, killing his parents and stalking others at night while whispering, "Go to sleep." That's a very short summary of the story. The story is actually really interesting. It goes deeper into all of this, but it's really creepy because, again, this is like of a serial killer. We all grew up with those as kids: Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, and Jeff the Killer was just like an online version of one of those killers that wasn't as popular to be on like a big screen, but was definitely a story that a lot of kids were creeped out by. And again, like many other ones, there's a picture that accompanies this creepypasta, and it's probably one of the most famous creepypasta pictures that's ever existed. This next one is for all the gamers out there, and of course we're talking about Lavender Town Syndrome. This creepypasta is a story that claims that when Pokemon Red and Green first released in Japan, the eerie Lavender Town music had hidden frequencies that made children sick, some of them even committing suicide. The story goes that dozens of kids suffered nausea, headaches, and even committed suicide after listening to the music in Lavender Town, leading Nintendo to secretly change its later releases. Supposedly only the Japanese cartridges had the original dangerous sound. This one was believable because as a kid, when you're listening to this creepypasta and then you hear the song, it just gives you goosebumps. The Lavender track was creepy enough on its own, so the idea that music was harmful didn't really feel impossible. Especially when all the myths about subliminal messages in media, we all have seen it before, we've read about it before, so it didn't feel like something out of the ordinary that just some kids could have had some effect. There was stories before about kids suffering epilepsy from one of the Pokemon episodes, so a Pokemon game having something to do with sound and frequencies just didn't feel in the realm of impossibility. This next one isn't necessarily the most popular one, at least I don't think so. It bothered me as a kid just because it involved some like religious messaging that freaked me out when I was a kid. We're talking about Abandoned by Disney. In the story, an urban explorer discovers an abandoned Disney resort called Mowgli's Palace. This place was huge. It was completely decayed, abandoned, and there was graffiti all over the place. He discovers piles of old costumes in a sealed room, including a horrifying photo-negative Mickey suit. Basically a Mickey costume, inverted collars, and hollow eyes. The suit moved on its own and spoke before oozing black liquid. Terrified, the narrator flees the palace and later claims Disney covered up the whole project. One of the graffiti that was found on one of the walls in the story said, "God has abandoned us." This freaked me out just because, like, I didn't grow up in a religious family, but you know, when you're a kid, you always talk about how God's protecting you, God's watching you. And Disney is supposed to be this place for kids, full of happiness, and just reading or hearing somebody say that God has abandoned us, it's just so eerie and like freaky. It also sounds legit, right? I mean, we all know that Disney's capable of having many resorts, and if one is left abandoned, it doesn't really affect them as much. Similar to when they make movies. If a movie flops, it's gonna suck, but it's not gonna shut down Disney. So it's very believable, especially back in the day when you would see you could look up any video on YouTube of people exploring haunted houses or asylums or hospitals. So somebody finding an old amusement park, finding a Disney resort wasn't something that you look into and you think is impossible. So it really freaked me out, and I'm glad that I realized that it's all fake. I probably didn't do justice to a lot of these creepypastas because some of them have way more detail, they're longer, and I would encourage anybody to go and actually check them out. I'm gonna leave some links in the description. You could read them or you could watch some YouTube channels. A lot of them are pretty old. I mean, like 13 years ago, some of these videos. It really takes me back to my youth. You know, if you've never heard of creepypastas, maybe some of these tickled your fancy and you could check them out. If you've heard of creepypastas, you actually have some favorite ones, definitely let me know. I used to read a lot of them. I don't remember many of them now, but I used to sit there for hours when I was a kid and just listen to these YouTube videos, and they used to really freak me out. And I thought, you know, since it's about to be spooky season, we're all going to be watching horror movies, I thought it would be an interesting thing to look at how the internet affected us psychologically in the realm of horror, aside from movies and, you know, scary shows. I think online horror stories don't hit like they used to now, just because kids are growing up with internet, they're growing up with tablets, they're quick to say things are fake, they can fact check things better, parents are around that know better. So when I was a kid growing up with this, my parents didn't know what creepypastas were, so there was nobody I could really talk to about this aside from my buddies, and we all believed this stuff. Please let us know if you enjoyed this video, like, dislike. And let me know if you guys have like a favorite creepypasta, and we're definitely going to be doing some more creepy videos just because I love spooky season, and I think I'm going to share more stuff about, you know, what you can do to prepare for it. So thank you for being with me today. Until the next one.